The topic assigned to me is how to turn your dissertation into a book for a broader audience. Allow me first to give you some background about my own research. My dissertation topic is on the Psalms of Lament. Okay? This topic was published a year after I have successfully defended it. And the title of the book is The Uncertainty of a Hearing, a Sudden Change of Mood in the Psalms of Lament. Yeah, so that's the book. The key there is the word uncertainty. Okay, I find most of studies of lament too certain. There's always an answer at the end, but I have highlighted in my dissertation that I discovered in the lament that there are also laments that move the opposite direction from praise to lament, and they end tragically. I think these psalms or lament are important because they present a more realistic picture of the life of today, especially in the midst of the war. There are three things that led me to do a research on the lament. First, my pastoral experience as a pastor for more than 10 years. I noticed that Sunday after Sunday, our songs and testimonies are all the same. They're positive. Even when someone dies or a member's house is destroyed by fire, we continue to sing happy songs all the time. One of our favorite songs is in Filipino, Ang buhay ng Kristiyano ay masayang tunay, or in English, the life of a Christian is happy all the time. And of course, God is good all the time. That's a very popular chorus. No? But is this the only response of a Christian? I began to ask that in the midst of my experience as a pastor. And as I prayed, I was led by the Lord, I think, to the lament. And this is the reason why when I had the opportunity to do a PhD, I already know what my topic will be on, and that is on the lament. Can we show the next slide? So the next reason, so the first one is my pastoral experience. The second one is my experience with depression. After my PhD, while I was still in the UK, I suffered major depression, and I realized that I actually have that depression early on in my life. It's just that it was in the UK after my PhD that it was detected, major depression. And I was working on the lament already then. I already finished this research. And one of the things, again, that helped me, of course, my wife has been there to help me, carry on the darkness of depression. But another thing that helped me was the lament psalms, no? So that again drove me to the Psalms. And then when I returned to the Philippines, I became aware of injustices in our country. And that is the third thing that led me to the lament, the injustices. The question, actually the Bibles in the lament are not only for personal healing. One of the main concerns in the lament is the issue of justice. The laments teach us how to engage in society, how to protest, not be quiet, by allowing us first to protest even to God. The question, in fact, the question why is the most common question in the laments, especially among the so-called community or communal laments. So these experiences, these three things, particularly the first one, my pastoral experience, was what led me to do a dissertation on lament. So I wrote this book, this dissertation, it was published by BRILL in 2008. But then before they publish it, because at the conclusion of the dissertation, I included an application for the church, because that was the thing that actually led me and inspired me to do our research on the lament, my pastoral experience. But then the editor in BRILL told me that they don't include application to church, so they removed it. And I felt sad. So what I did when I went home is to develop a book, to develop the conclusion, the application to the church into a small book. And this is what I came to be known as the in my country as It's Okay to Be Not Okay. It's a small book, very small one. Can we show the next slide? No? But this book is based on my own research. And this is one example of how I turned my dissertation into popular reading. So It's Okay to Be Not Okay was later published by Langham for preaching. So this is used among preaching seminars of Langham worldwide. And then I developed into three. These are the cute pictures of the book in Filipino, okay lang. No? Later, it was published in Bahasa Indonesia, and then in Chinese, and then Spanish. No? So these three, which came out from my own study of the lament. I didn't expect that this book will be translated into these various languages, but I'm just amazed at how important, they realize the topic of lament. And then out of my experience of depression, I wrote a popular book called Lord, I'm Depressed, which is available also as an ebook. And then chapters in the book Faith and Bayan. Can we show that, those two books? These two. So this afternoon, this morning today, I would like to thank you for this privilege of sharing with you what are some of the principles that I've learned when I turned my dissertation into this series. And actually, I'm writing another book now for a more maybe a middle popular version on which I entitled Tragic Lament. And this afternoon or today, afternoon here in the Philippines, morning, wherever you are, or evening, I would like to share with you by beginning with a story from the Gospel of Mark. Stories are important when you turn your dissertation into a book for broader audience, especially if it is a popular book. Even in sermons, often it is the story that people remember, not your 3-point sermon outline. The story I'd like to read today is the story of the healing of the paralytic. And I would like to invite you to read this with me, wherever you are, maybe silently, as I read this. No? It says here, and many were gathered together, so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them, and they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, some of the scribes were sitting there. It is not my intention to give a full exegetical analysis of the passage. I hope that those among you here who are pure-blooded historical critics will bear with me. I come to this story because it illustrates some of the things I have learned about writing, particularly in relation to our topic. No, so I approached our topic from the biblical studies perspective because this is my discipline, and I am a biblical scholar by training. Incidentally, the biblical scholars are present in the story. Yeah. Who are the biblical scholars in Jesus' time? The answer would be what? The scribes. The scribes are the scholars and the teachers of scriptures, the descendants and successors of the Levites from the days of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Chronicles. At a time when very few people could read and write, the scribes were the educated men of their time. They were the PhD holders. There is evidence in the ancient Near East, according to Karel van der Toorn, that those who completed various branches of knowledge can move further into specializations. Now, very few reach this stage. To be a scribe is to be a part of an elite group. Van der Toorn describes this group as a, quote, closed society of learned men, unquote. And this makes them a people of privilege. Like in the Philippines and many parts in Asia, If you have like a PhD, you are treated differently. For example, in gatherings, they serve special food for you. And even in the time of Jesus, if you will notice, that's why in the narrative in Mark 2, while many people are standing outside, they cannot even get in. Where are the scribes, the biblical scholars? They're seated right there in front of Jesus. The text says, now some of the scribes were sitting there. If this were a football game, they have the best seat in the stadium. You look at the next slide. Yeah. Please, the next slide. You have the best seat there. Look at that. Now the scribes were sitting there. They have the best seat. No? But having the best seat is not a guarantee that we will be in the best position to see what God is doing or to hear what God is saying. The scribes are right there in front of Jesus, and yet they could not see the significance of what Jesus was doing. In fact, the text says in verse 6, they were questioning in their hearts. Ironically, it is not the biblical scholars in Jesus' time who served as good models for biblical scholars and theologians for today. Rather, it is those in the margins, those who are outside the house, those who cannot get into the house, those represented by the four unnamed men. The four men represent those who showed concern to the paralytic by bringing him to Jesus. And in the text, it was with them, with these people, that Jesus was pleased. He saw their faith. One of the first lessons and principles that we can learn from this story has to do with our context. In turning our dissertation into books for broader audience or popular book, number one, context is very important. The place where we are, okay, or what Elacuria calls in Spanish, lugar teólogo, the place where we do our theologizing, that is very important. Elacuria believes that the best place to do theology is among the poor and the oppressed. One advantage of the four men in the story was that they were close to where the needs are. See, the very place they were standing outside of the house among the people puts them in a position where they can hear the cries of the suffering. Unlike the scribes who were seated comfortably in the house, inside the house, these four men were right there where the needs are. Now, the text does not give us details of how the four men came to know about the paralytic. Were they neighbors to the man? Or did they just happen to be standing beside the paralytic while he was crying out, please bring me to Jesus? No, maybe both are possible. But the important thing was that they were close to where the needs are. And more importantly, they heard the man and did something to help him. One of the problems or challenges facing biblical scholars and theologians today is that usually we do our training not in the midst of needs. As Abraham Kovacs and Zoltan Sobab, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, they wrote in the introduction of the book, In Academia for the Church, and let's show that, they say that many of the younger generation of Eastern European theologians earned their PhDs in prestigious Western European universities. This certainly helps them, they said, to join cutting-edge international academic discussions, but at the same time, this presents a serious question: how to apply their knowledge obtained in the West to the particular concerns of post-communist Eastern Europe. And we could add today, how can they apply what they have learned in the midst of the war? The situation is similar to my own context. The founders of the Association of Biblical Scholars in the Philippines, of which I am a part, most of the founders obtained their academic degrees in America or in Europe. I did my PhD in one of the most posh, or rich places in England. My externals supervisor is from Oxford University. But receiving degrees from prestigious universities does not mean you are in a good place. If by good place we mean a place where you will learn how to contribute towards the good of humanity or human flourishing. As the editors of the book, The Betrayal of the Humanities, the university during the Third Reich, which is, I think, published just last year, the editors remind us. Can we show the next slide, please? No? The German universities are widely considered to have been the very best in the world during the 19th and early 20th century. Yet, they also became the very best at proposing anti-Semitic solutions to the alleged Jewish problem. One example is the biblical scholar Gerald Kittel. I'm grateful to the training I received from the United Kingdom, and certainly broadened my perspective. But I came to understand the Bible more deeply when I went back to my roots, to my own bayan. We call the bayan, that's our homeland, my country, my history in the context of colonial experiences, sufferings brought about by natural and man-made disasters. Richard Bauckham is right when he said, quote, "Those who turn to God in circumstances of oppression have a hermeneutical privilege." We have a saying in Filipino, "Those who do not know how to look back to where they have come from will not reach their destination." Ang hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan, hindi makararating sa pararoonan. One problem with some of those who have received the training in the West is that they no longer want to return. They don't want to look back to where they have come from. The temptation for prestige, for fame is so strong. But my question is, why did we do theology? Why did we study the Bible and theology in the first place? What is our calling? And that is the second point that I'd like to share, our calling. This question confronted me when I returned to the Philippines after finishing my PhD. I have to be honest that after 3 years of studying there, I've dreaded the day when I, together with my family, will be taking that plane from London back to Manila, to the Philippines. Because we have gotten used to the comforts of the life in England. And prior to going back to Manila, I was warned by someone in the seminary that life there will not be easy when we return. And indeed, that was what happened. Our seminary, my workplace, was in financial difficulties when we returned. In fact, we were told at one time that we may no longer have our salary the following month. So, I was forced to take on other jobs. I found myself leading a Bible study group among government employees. Every Tuesday during lunchtime, I preach every Sunday in churches, sometimes up to 4 times, so I could support my family somehow. And by the way, some churches in the Philippines give reasonable giving. Okay, and occasionally you get those in Pentecostal traditions, the hallelujah handshakes, where somebody shake your hand and then something is left in your hand, a blessing or an envelope. No, I did that, and I taught discipleship training in on Sundays afternoons. It was good, but it was not what biblical scholars would call scholarly. In fact, in this Bible study, one of my students didn't even know how to read or write. And in the midst of all of this, I couldn't help but ask myself, why am I here? Is this the reason why I did my PhD? I wish I was teaching in a prestigious university, presenting papers at SBL, and so my self-esteem went down. But it was during these struggles that I heard the words of Jesus in my heart. Whatever you did for one of the least of my brothers and sisters, you did for me. This is our calling. Like the 4 men or the people who brought the paralytic to Jesus, we are being called to serve the least, those outside, the marginalized. God has placed us where we are, so that through our gifts of scholarship, people will be drawn to the Lord. The goal of scholarship is much bigger than publishing articles or books in prestigious university or publishers, or being invited to lecture at Cambridge. It is to turn our writings and all of us, our scholarship, into a prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And in order to accomplish this, we need a community. When we are writing, we need communities and not just singular. That's the third thing that I'd like to share with you. We cannot do the task alone. It took a community represented by the four men to bring the paralytic to Jesus. To fulfill our calling, we need communities. And these communities, of course, include our academic community. Okay? Secondly, our church community, and also those who suffer. Academic community, we need to work together, first of all, between biblical scholars and theologians. Unfortunately, in some seminaries, the two do not talk to each other. But we cannot do the task without the theologians and without the biblical scholars, and not just within the biblical traditions, but also from the other disciplines like social sciences. More relevant to our topic, we need the church community, the lay people, those who did not have seminary background. One of the communities that nurtured in me the ability to turn my academic writings into popular readings is my church community. Often in the seminary, when I was pastoring, I would turn my exegetical papers into sermons, and this forced me to think more in concrete terms, to write more simply, and in this way, I was able to understand the text more profoundly. You know, to write simply, we have to understand profoundly. But how do we know that we have understood profoundly? If we can explain it simply. As Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. End of quote. The audience is important. Would we want to reach, assist, encourage, guide through our writings? You know, I am aware that as I speak in the midst of an ongoing war. Even as we are here in this Zoom call, the Russians continue to ravage Ukraine, wounding, killing, destroying the lives of our brothers and sisters. Writing in the context of World War II, the German biblical scholar Klaus Westermann said that, and I quote, "In the great catastrophes of our time," says, "the lament is important for those who suffer." Our calling as communities of theologians is to serve those who suffer. But how do we write? How do we do our theology? How do we do our biblical studies for the sake of those who suffer? How do we live out our calling as a community in the context of war? We need creativity in confronting the chaos. In the story, in the Gospel of Mark, those who were bringing the paralytic, you notice they could no longer enter the usual channel. They could not enter the door to get to Jesus because it's blocked. There were so many people at the door. So what did they do? They went out to the roof, and actually they literally unroofed the roof. That's the Greek there that was used. They unroofed the roof, or at least portion of the roof, from where they let down the bed of the paralytic. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And the actions of the people here who brought the paralytic to Jesus reflects a sense of desperation, urgency, and a deep care for the suffering person. In the face of suffering, even roofs can and should be unroofed. But one problem with some of our theologizing is that there's no sense of urgency. It lacks that sense of desperation. Our theology tends to be secured. It's too safe. It doesn't want to disturb. Trust in the Lord. God is in control. He is sovereign. Rejoice. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God. It is easy to say these things, It is easy for those of us who are far from the war zones to say, you are a Christian. Why can't you just move on? Forgive. But in the midst of the war, let us remember that it is not the paralytic that is being carried, but the wounded, the dying, the dead, the suffering innocent. And if you look at this picture, I don't know where they're going, where they're bringing this innocent, this lady. How do we do theology in this situation? We need a space, in this case, for that which is tragic. As Rowan Williams said in his book, Tragic Imagination, at some point, he says, even the most confident faith has to be honest about what is utterly unresolved in human experience, what cannot be made sense of, if making sense means showing why it's a good thing, really. For those who are at the bottom of the well, we need tragic theology. As our very own Roman Soloby tells us in his article, those of us who are outside Ukraine, he says, to those who are outside Ukraine, he says, we in Ukraine have entered Gethsemane, overwhelmed by loneliness and despair, the horror of the heinous violence. Deadly sorrow overcomes hearts with the thought that the hardest times are still ahead. In fact, one time when we asked Roman, what do you want us to pray for you? This is what he said, we do not know if in my lifetime I will ever see peace. And let me continue. He said here, although we certainly believe that after Calvary will come resurrection, for now, today, we are here in Gethsemane. The time came when the risen Jesus met with the apostles in Galilee, but that was later. In the garden, his request was simple, to share his pain, he says. Just to be near him with no appeals. This is the kind of theology we need at this time. Tragic situations call for tragic theology. Even a psalm that turns to praise, like Psalm 22, becomes a lament in the midst of suffering, as our Lord Jesus himself quoted not the praise part of the Psalm of Psalm 22, but the first part, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the question that rings loud in the cries in the midst of the war. And it is not the absence of faith to cry, my God, why have you forsaken us? Thank you again for this privilege of sharing with you.